I do work right now for one of those organizations that's been called Unreal. But yet we stay straight at the story and we try to get to the facts. And we did that at CNN Worldwide when I was there. We do that at MSNBC and NBC News right now. And I know that this topic that we're about to go over very quickly, high-impact storytelling for business, how does it fit in with what we're doing here today for this great gathering and when we think about innovation and inclusion? And I sort of think of, when we think of being inclusive, and we think about the leaders that do stand at the top that drive this idea of innovation and disruption and inclusion, where are the voices and how are those voices formed? And if you just look at those with the Asian faces or those of Asian descent in the boardrooms across the Fortune 500, any guess here in terms of the number overall? You can shout it out. Okay, none. You're pretty doggone close. It's more than none, so you can sleep tonight. It is about 130. What percentage of the Fortune 500 board members does that comprise? 3%. Now, folks of Asian descent in this great country of ours is 6 or 7%. We got some work to do. And so when we talk about innovation, inclusion, and disruption, from the top to the bottom to the middle, there are some opportunities. And the question might be why? And that brings me to this idea that when we talk about those who've made it to the top, AAPI does not mean Asian, and Asian doesn't mean AAPI. I know I'm slicing bread here. I'm really cutting it really thin here, threading the needle. But that's an important distinction. When we spoke at Walmart together, I just came back from Microsoft yesterday. Those are clear distinctions when we look at Asian talent, from the midsection to every level to the boardroom. Those distinctions are very important in the way we talk about it. And it's not easy to necessarily group them together or understand them holistically in any conversation that you have. So how do we get more folks up to the top? That's my question, right? That's just some sort of a little bit of my thought on the background. I was talking with the CMO of Apple, and she had brought, up to iPhone 6 to market. And she was saying something about what is relevant to Asians and AAPIs getting to the boardroom, getting through middle management, getting into upper management. And that is that there's this question of a muscle set, of whether we have that muscle set. Folks that look like me or similar to me or fit into that group of what comprises 56 countries if you're with the UN, 48 if you're with the US Census, in terms of what it means to be Asian, American, Pacific Islander, or Asian. And that part of that muscle set is the ability to really communicate not only personally our own narrative, but also the narratives of the business units that we are in control of and or the organizations that we lead. And therefore, letting it dribble down into the strategic initiatives that we therefore derive from that. Now, the old days when I was in business school, we did not have a narrative for business class. We just didn't have it. But if you go back to the CMO, she said, look, the way we talk about business right now is through narratives. Strategically, when we're in the boardroom, when she used to sit down with Steve Jobs, now, just because Apple does it doesn't mean it's the right way. But what was interesting is that then when I went back to the Valley, which I go back 2 or 3 times a month, and speaking with some of the CEOs out there, and then speaking with her, and she left Apple and now runs called West. You may have heard of her company. And she's hiring nothing but journalists. Not only because we're losing our jobs, but she's hiring journalists because this idea that this word we've heard so much, authenticity, right? How many times have we heard authenticity in the last 5 years? Is what journalists bring. Just like my joke at the top. Because we really do strive to get to the meat. And if you're in network news, as Tom knows, when you're writing those scripts, you cut out all the fat. You get it right, you make it impactful, and you make it the best in the world, right? And Tom did that for years on some of the most complex stories of our time. And so that's where she's going. That's where marketing is going. That's where strategy is going. I wish when I was in B school only 15 years ago, we thought about it that way. I really do believe narrative and storytelling is not only essential to those who are trying to get to that corner office or into the boardroom from our spaces, because we're really not good at it, I got to say. Asians and Asian American Pacific Islanders, we're not so good about tooting our horn or getting the facts right out there in impactful ways. So that is, I think, why I wanted to talk about storytelling and high-impact storytelling and the way we kind of think about it, at least over at NBC News, and what I've learned from some of the best, I believe. Because if we're telling good stories, what happens? We want more. There's hunger. And so that's the idea. You know, it's what gets that viewer to say, I want to Google that, or I want to find out more about you, or I want to get you into my business. I want to hear what ideas you can bring to me now, because you just done such a fantastic job about telling me your narrative, or your business unit's narrative, or your business's narrative. And then I think we'll be able to not only find the right leaders of Asian descent for the pipeline, but also to get them through that ceiling, which whatever it's made of, get them through that ceiling. So that's what I'm going to do for the next couple of moments. I got two controllers here. I guess they both work. That does not mean you're going to have to split your eyeballs. I'm not going to do that to you. But I'll get straight moving now. High-impact storytelling for business. And what I mean is, you've seen a good story before, right? You could be watching any of the nightly newses on ABC, CBS, or NBC. You see a good 90 seconds. You go, it's good. Now I have to Google that. Well, I'm going to go through a top 10 of what I believe is applicable from that space to your space based on the background I just gave. So stay with me. If you have any questions along the way, because I'm being too much about what we do over in news, you just stop me and you raise your hand, you scream out, how do I apply that to what I'm doing? Or give me a practical example if I'm not getting into it for you, because I will definitely go there. But I do want to be able to get through in the time I've got the things that we would like to cover. So my top 10, first of all, know the audience, and you've seen that before. But that is such a basic, because we forget who we're talking to. Like, who am I talking to today in this room? I'm talking to big thinkers that are strategic and practical. And this session is going to be a very practical session, obviously, because I have a top 10 list, and I want you to try these things as you go. Know your audience is something that we all learned in our basic speaking class. The first point I want to make is, well, how do I live? How does who you're talking to live? Because we have a lot of statistics that we always look at, either from Nielsen or anywhere else. But the question is, how is it that I put on my boots every day? How do I brush my teeth? Who do I talk to? This whole idea of psychographic analysis has certainly grown into something even wider. But still, you'll see, even in my industry, for instance, we'll be looking at numbers coming from these places that are still relevant, but not really telling us how does the audience I'm reaching live. What are my beliefs? Do I believe in God? Do I believe in no God? Do I believe in whatever it might be? And those, again, the hows. Another question you can ask is, how do I talk to each other? How do I personally talk to somebody else? What is that? Those soft points. I put that up there because what I've realized in the scant amount of time that I have normally in meeting anybody and then interviewing them is about 30 to 60 seconds. And so if I were to talk to you and you're sitting on set and we're going to dive into, let's just say, the election in France, and I just met you, and I've got 30 seconds. My most common question I'll ask to get a sense of who you are is one of two. How are you? Or what do you think we're not talking about enough? Yeah, and see if you respond in a French accent, and that's okay if you don't. But whichever way you answer is, I'm getting a sense of how, again here, you talk to another person, and I get a lot of understanding about who you are. And by asking those very simple questions, I get a sense. And knowing the audience is important. You can have any set of questions that you would like. Number 9, this one is 333. This is what was drilled into my brain in business school. Threes, everything's in threes. Slides have to be threes. Shamrocks are in threes. So in narrative, define a 3-year story. What's that one story you want to get out there for 3 years? Because we're kind of in a, we want to tweet that. I want to, whatever you're thinking, you got to get it out there really fast. But no, one story for 3 years. And then underneath that, 3 supportive narratives for that overall narrative for the entire year. This could be a strategic narrative, could be a marketing narrative, it could be a narrative related to your recruiting strategy. But again, 3-year narrative sort of supported by 3 one-year narratives that feed up, right? And this is, again, to try to get away from that space of reacting too quickly, which we're kind of in the age of. And then finally, you can kind of guess here, define 3 trimester stories to support your annual narrative. And I think this way of thinking, in any space that you're at, whether it is very operational or very strategic, in thinking of an inclusion or of your own personal brand, like I have laid out for myself personally what might be my 3-year narrative or my 1-year narrative. And this changes all the time. And you can see just the sense, being very deliberate about what that narrative is and then the things you need to do to achieve that story. Number 8, fake it till you make it. I know I should have taken out that word because we see it too much. Fake it till you make it. And you can get a sense here. This is Pareto over here in the lower left. I really dig the dude because of his 80-20. Create running hypotheses. I always, and this is something that not necessarily, if you went to Jay's school, they would say, the facts will tell you what the hypothesis is. But because I come from business and I used to be a strategy consultant, I'm always thinking of throwing out the hypothesis that I've developed if any piece of data disproves it. And I think when we think of telling our own stories and that we work on, have those running hypotheses, both personally as well as on a business unit level. And of course, do what, dream a little in the narrative. 20% of what you want it to be, right? A lot of times when we're writing out plans, it's only, but A plus B equals C. 1 plus 1 equals 2. I love, and this may be why I'm not so good at my job during the daytime, I love 1 plus 1's equal 3. And that's because I see sort of this exponential existence that we're all in, if we can think outside of the box. Finally, on fake it till you make it, be inspirational and confident in your thematic, but certainly not, unrealistic. Don't be cocky, because you can get to do a lot when you're thinking of these narratives. Certainly dream as you lay it out, but fake it until you make it. You've seen speeches on TED about this, and I really do believe this. It does work. Number 7, lead with your best pictures. So it did not matter when I would come back from the field and want to do this great story, and I'd written this beautiful, in 90 seconds, this beautiful sort of opening, and then my executive producer will say, or my package producer will say, so show me the video. What do you got? It doesn't match what you just wrote. So you got to show, you got to lead with what is your best stuff that you actually have, not what you've written. So once you have your hypothesis in your narrative, go out and you've got to prove it. Get that equivalent of the picture and then lead with the best that you've got. That's really the point here. Lead with the best that you got. Sometimes we don't lead with the best pictures. Related to that is, again, what I just said. Think visually and write visually. The way I wrote before when I was in business for 12 years, after going to Ross School of Business at Michigan, and then going to Citibank is, I didn't write visually. But when we tell stories in visual ways, like what I realize now is when I talk to people, I am sometimes just seeing these things in front of me, like these pictures. Like when you and I were talking on set, I was thinking you were sitting on set. And I was thinking you were speaking in French. You were, is what you're saying. So there you go. That's your 20% of dreaming of what you want it to be. And then finally, in terms of leading with your best pictures, obviously, what you'd follow with? Your second best picture and your third best picture, right? Number 6, lean on muscular verbs when you're telling your narrative. This is very specific, right? Muscular verbs, pierce, punch. Avoid those passive verb structures and what you use every day. Also in your strategy papers, right? We often, you've seen them before, my God, these one-pagers. You only got one page. Why are you wasting on these chubby words, these chubby sentences? All this fat in it. Cut it out. Get rid of it. Passive, has been. You don't need has been. What could you say instead? I find this all the time in writing. Was. How many letters have you saved there? 5 character spaces. That's huge. Find verbs that connote action, movement, and energy. I just gave a couple at the top again. Punch, pierce, love them all. My favorite thing to do after I write something is to go through all my verbs, and then if I don't like it, pull out the thesaurus and just look at like 50 other options. It's so much fun. It really is. Your coworkers will think you're crazy. And again, don't lean on those adjectives and adverbs as crutches. Your narrative will just come screaming through when you say it if you just do these simple things. Come screaming through one-to-one, or in that which you do in your correspondence, or in your one-pagers, in the reports when you come to the board. All this makes all of your communication so concise. It's just juicy. Number 5, 3 I's. I brought that up. 3 I's. I did that 3 earlier. But enumerate your points into 3. Pull analogies from nature. I've heard a lot of it, like shamrocks. You've probably heard used before. You know, like life is like a shamrock. Or you can use chemical theorems, what have you, but use those to, again, reinforce that idea of 3 that I was mentioning. And think cadence. I know you don't think necessarily that you're writing a poem when you're writing. Think like you're writing a poem when you're writing. Think about that. It's something, even in your emails. Like, I don't know if, I do that sometimes in my emails right now. I'm just like, oh, this would be a nice little, I'll use that instead. Because if you practice it all the time, all of a sudden it becomes very easy for you. And I know you're not thinking when you're sitting down there in a very crucial meeting that you're going to start eliciting poems about the last quarter. But heck, if you did, boy, you would stand out, right? Lead with the poem. Parallelism. Like these still work today, and this is why I'm bringing them up, because we really do teach new correspondents these things. And if we're doing that at places that I mentioned earlier and it works, do it more. Reveals, one of my favorite. It's like an onion. It's like a surprise when you're telling the story. Sometimes you want to throw it all up on top, but sometimes reveal it. Just pull me in, step by step by step. Number 4, short word gatherings. Okay, I could have said that better. But I wanted to say that because don't hide behind the long sentences. Do this sort of like, when you're out there, jab, 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 then all of a sudden go, boom, when you're writing. Ba-doop, 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 bam. Think like a boxer, right? Just sort of dancing and get me in there, and then boom. Longer's not better. Kiss. My mom learned that when she was at UCLA. And I've remembered it for my entire life. She was a school teacher. It's so true. I used to try to make my sentences like this long to sound smart. We were all taught that in college, weren't we? Like, the longer the thing you have, the smarter you are. And then, as a journalist, you learn that's completely wrong. And it has made those pieces that I might write for a print publication so much stronger, I must say, because of ideas like this. Number 3, when you are quoting somebody for whatever you're doing, it doesn't need to be like, and they said, and you got this indented on the left, indented on the right, and then it's like 3 paragraphs and quotation marks. You got to quote, 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 and you don't need that. What you need is show the humanity, show the oh wow. So like what we will often select when we're putting our stories together to go on air will be things like Oh. And that's it. And I could have been sitting there interviewing this person for an hour and a half. But because that was it, I introduced your title, and it's not what you thought. It was the emotion. It was the angst. It was that passion. Don't overlean on the numbers. You can say that very much more efficiently in your narrative, right? And keep those quotes short in general. Don't do that. Number 2, 1 or 2 facts. I'm following on what I just said in terms of numbers. We know that they don't tell a story by themselves, but you do need to have facts. I always like a global number. I started with a global number, didn't I? The number of those of Asian descent in the Fortune 500. And you got where I was going. Like, this is an issue. We got an issue, 3%. And I think it tells the story in terms of why we're here today. Why disruption is needed. We need disruption because there's not good representation. And then going back to the hypothesis and then finding the fact, this goes back again to the consulting days. Define your story, then find the fact that supports it. If it doesn't support it, then you're wrong. That's one way to look at your narrative development. And then finally, the way we see it, at least, is I've been told, Richard, you're putting together 90 seconds that's like a mini movie. What does that mean? It means that every second you will spare no expense for those 90 to 120 seconds. And we really do that. When you turn on the news every night on ABC, CBS, NBC, 6 p.m., 6:30, 7 p.m., wherever you are in the country, there's teams and teams of people that are worried about a half second, a quarter second, an eighth of a second, a preposition, whether you put this word here, you put a picture or the there that I was telling you about, that angst. And that really, I think, encapsulates the idea of what we do when we're telling narratives and why it's so important for narratives personally, as well as when we're leading in the spaces that all of you lead in, whether it be in community, whether it is in business, or whether it is in the not-for-profit space, or in politics, if there's any politicians here. All of these are so important because we don't have a lot of wasted time we don't have a lot of time to waste when we are communicating narratives. And that's how I impact storytelling for business, personally and all those levels. So I just want to share a couple of my ideas. You're supposed to be eating while I did this, by the way, but I apologize. We have, I think, 2 or 3 minutes for questions, and we can talk about whatever you'd like, just not that topic. That's not what I'm here for. How's it going? What's your name?
Rakesh Sahai.
Where are you from?
I work for GE. I live in Connecticut.
GE, all right. Crotonville?
Never
been?
That's not in GE. That's not in Connecticut.
Yeah, but have you ever been to Crotonville is what I was saying.
Yes.
I got that part.
I didn't ask the question correctly. So what I wanted to hear from you is that could you show a story or an example where we can see all of that, what you talked about?
So there was a story I wanted to do, and it was about where we are when it comes to race in America and how media reflects that. And it was a tough one because she gave me 2 minutes. And it was because we came out with a new series called Fresh Off the Boat. And this is what I did. It's not the best, but it's what I did.
A whole new Modern Family is coming to network television tonight. It's taking the diversity conversation in a new direction. The last time an Asian American family was featured on network television was in 1994 in All American Girl. But that's all about to change. Tonight, there's a big difference. Here's MSNBC's Richard Louie.
Black, not black-ish.
Daddy
scaring me.
If network TV has it right, today's American family is not what it used to be. Upper middle class and African American.
You and your wife must be thrilled.
Sorry, Daddy needed snacks.
LGBTQ with an adopted daughter.
Didn't you eat your lunch today?
And now Asian accented with an 11-year-old who embraces black culture.
That's me, your boy Eddie Wong.
Eddie from Fresh Off the Boat, this year's new ABC comedy. His family, a far cry from the generations of families on TV to date. Remember the 1950s Leave It to Beaver ideal?
Hey kids, look what I got!
It shifted in the 1960s.
Hi, B! Hi, Pa!
The Andy Griffith Show was a single-parent family.
Talk about a generation gap.
And the Brady Bunch, a blended family. Both very non-Cleaver and non-Eddie. The 70s turned. Minority families on TV blossomed in number.
As Confucius once said, if you don't want to order knuckles in your face and get your pork and noodles out of my place.
Fred Sanford was the black answer to bigot Archie Bunker. In Chico and the Man, Chico Rodriguez educates the man. And Mr. T and Tina.
I lose it in the translation.
Perpetuated the ever-arriving Asian to America. Fresh Off the Boat, like Blackish, forges a different path, one closer to the way minorities see minorities, because of a new generation of minds behind the camera.
Based on the memoir of celebrity chef Eddie Wong.
Then there's this from a UCLA study. Shows reflecting the country's racial makeup consistently score higher ratings, as much as double.
Nevertheless, TV shows underrepresent minorities by 21 percentage points. Households are shaped by these cast choices. The Center for Media Literacy found high schoolers describe actors of color as typical of that ethnic group. So, getting it right counts.
I may be in love with Javier.
Latinos as maids, blacks as butlers,
I'm here.
Asians as nerds. Eddie wants more. He's learning about his Americanness, and so is America. Richard Louie, MSNBC, New York.
So that's one story I did, and it was, thanks. He's not a planted question, by the way. It's not a planted question. But you are now hired, though, wherever I go speak. So some of those ideas were in there. You saw the parallelism. You saw the use of threes. You saw the use of some facts, not a lot. I had 2 facts in there, 1 or 2 facts. And also tackling something that was, at least from my executive editor's request, a big topic to cover in 2 minutes. But I thought taking us through that parallelism, not only of history, but also, which I think is very important to this group here, because one of the words in why we're here is Asia or Asian or AAPI, and showing the parallelism to other groups that we often forget in this space. I am Chinese, I am Indian, I am Vietnamese, and I stay in that lane over too much. And we need to think about these other parallels. And I think that is also part of the thematic. And that's what I definitely wanted to bring in to that story, because the more we can talk about it in this way, those differences help us to understand our similarities. I think we have time. Is it? Oh, one more, okay. She's the boss, so we can.
Hi, how are you? My name is Sylvia. You did a career change from going through an operations career into being a CNN news anchor. And I wonder, what motivated that? But most importantly, how did you tell your story to sell yourself with this career background in operations to change that into news anchor? It's
a good question. There was a time where I would check certain things at the door when I walked into any room. And there was a time where I used to check that I'm this, like you couldn't tell. That I'm Asian. And I used to check that I worked at Mrs. Fields Cookies for 5 years out of high school, and I didn't go to college. So when I was in business school, when you go through those editing, who's been in business school in here? You go through those resume workshops, and they're like, oh, take that out, put that in, take that out, put that in. And I kept on getting the take that out on my Mrs. Fields 5 years, but it was so formative for me. And I think that experience really galvanized my idea of what I could do in my career. Because I knew in my heart and my brain that's what had made me who I am. And then this thing when I was in news. So when I made that transition, it was more of galvanizing
epiphanies, if you will. And one of those was saying, I worked at Mrs. Fields Cookies for 5 years. One of those was that. And another one of those galvanizing epiphanies was that, I come from a family of illegal immigrants. And all of these sort of, thematics and accepting them individually allows me to make choices that might be seen as bold or zigging when other people are zagging. And so there's just some of those acceptances as I wrote my own narrative, because I had to write my own narrative every single time. And I think once I'm able to communicate that in ways that are logical and real, that I could sit down in my interview and say, I would now like to work for CNN. And I would like to work for CNN because I've gone through these life experiences. I have interviewed through business school people of all backgrounds, of very high stature and no stature needed at all. And that's what you do as a journalist, is you need to talk to people all the time. And I can do that for you. But it was, be able to sit down and do that was accepting that reality of who I was and really digging into my narrative and really accepting it. All of you who have applied to business school or any graduate school, you've had to define your narrative. Every time you can do that, it's galvanizing. So that's what I think brought me to the ability to make that huge shift. And I'm going to make another shift again, I'm sure of it, because once you do it once, you're going to do it again. Just not every day, that's all. Yeah. All right, great. Thank you.